Hi everyone, my name is Schuyler Bailar. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm a transgender swimmer, so an athlete, an advocate. I do a lot of work with in mental health and social media, and that's my role here at Plume. I'm here today with Jerrica, the co-founder and chief medical officer of Plume, to talk about hormone replacement therapy.
Yeah, thanks Schuyler. My name is Jerrica Kirkley, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a trans woman and a physician, and I started Plume with my co-founder, Dr. Matthew Wechsler, to help increase access to gender affirmation services and in a radical and creative and supportive way.
Awesome. Yeah, I just want to say from my own self, I'm super stoked about Plume being here because I know that access to hormones is so important for so many trans folks. And it can be difficult no matter who you are and where you are to get it. So it's absolutely radical and life-saving that Plume's even here. So thanks for starting this company.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for saying that.
So let's start with what HRT is. So what does HRT stand for? What does it do? Can you give us a brief overview about HRT?
So HRT stands for hormone replacement therapy. The thing to know about HRT is that it's actually a medical term that's been used for the last probably 20 years or so to primarily describe the treatment of postmenopausal symptoms. It tends to be cisgender women who have this declining estrogen later in life, and they're actually treated with a supplementary prescribed estrogen to help with those symptoms. It's also been used to describe folks who are predominantly producing testosterone, but then those levels fall later in life or for various other reasons, and then they're actually giving a supplemental testosterone to treat the symptoms. But in the trans community, as we all know, that term has also been adopted to describe the process of taking hormones to affirm one's gender or to affirm one's gender identity. Technically, medically speaking, it's a little bit of a misnomer, just the way it's described in the medical world and literature. So one thing that we do a little bit differently in the literature, and something that's becoming a little bit more known in the community, is actually using a different term altogether, or at least slightly different, gender-affirming hormone therapy. So GAHT instead of HRT. So you'll see both those used, but gender-affirming hormone therapy is a little bit more accurate description of what we're doing.
So I know that you talked a little bit about the history of HRT, but what about the history of it for trans folks? How far back does that go? When was the first person who got HRT? I imagine that was probably pretty recent.
Relatively speaking, although just supportive gender affirming therapies for trans folks really goes back since the beginning of humans, basically, right? So thousands upon thousands of years ago, we have documentation of medical procedures, so surgical procedures, which predate the kind of contemporary medical institution as we know it to affirm one's gender. But in terms of hormones specifically, so it really starts in 1919. And that is when a physician, Magnus Hirschfeld, who was a Jewish gay cis man in Germany, started an institute, what he called the Institute for Sexual Science. And he was one of the first people to really validate and sympathize for the trans experience and really put that into writing in a way that had never been done before, and conducted some studies looking at people going through experiencing gender dysphoria and how to best support them. And while this started out with doing surgeries, once we had hormones synthesized in the 1930s, which included progesterone, testosterone, and estrogen, Dr. Hirschfeld and some other medical providers started to use hormones in the process of gender affirmation. So while we don't have probably documentation of the very first person to use hormones, because it was, even at that time, and maybe especially at that time, a process that was not viewed very favorable by the public and by the medical community. So it was probably happening on discrete levels, whether obtained by the individuals themselves or prescribed or administered by providers. But the first documented person that we have, at least in literature and in writings, is Michael Dillon, who was a British physician who started testosterone in 1939 for gender affirmation, and later went on to have both top surgery and bottom surgery in the 1940s. Wow. So, it kind of goes to show you that actually this is not quite so new. We've almost been doing the entire field of both hormones and surgery for gender affirmation for close to 100 years now.
Yeah, that's wild. Wow. It gives me shivers to think about that, because I feel like people think this is so new and different and therefore weird or bad. I know people have so many negative connotations about trans people, but not only have trans people been documented, it's the beginning of people being documented, but also we've had these medical advances for so much longer than people think that we have. So I think I don't know, that's like really affirming to me to hear.
Yeah, for sure. I think one important thing to know is that most folks are born producing both testosterone and estrogen, right? While there are some certain conditions out there which could limit that or limit the response to those hormones, but most people are born producing both of them. It's just that certain people produce more of one than the other. So what hormones do to the body would be what they do, quote unquote, naturally when they're in the body. And so they can affect things, various physical traits, how kind of our physical bodies feel and look, and a lot of what has been classically described as feminine or masculine traits. But it's important to note that for a lot of people, being on hormones is not necessarily a desire to be or appear feminine or masculine, but perhaps somewhere in the middle. But basically they exert changes on the body to change our expression and physical development.
I've heard that hormone therapy can be very similar to puberty, and I've been told that that's basically going through puberty again, just a couple things are different. Is that true?
You could think of it as sort of a second puberty in a sense. It kind of always depends on that person's individual history and whether and how much of if any, of a quote unquote first puberty they went through. For folks that are fortunate enough to have access to things like puberty blockers, we call them, which kind of halt that process before it really gets started. It's a very different scenario, and then starting hormones versus somebody who has gone through a complete first puberty, so to speak, and their body has changed in such a way, and so then it's kind of whatever you're starting after that point is starting with those changes that have occurred. But in a sense, you are kind of applying hormones and trying to get them to levels that would reflect sort of that initial puberty phase that a lot of folks go through. And I should also say that we talk about physical changes, but a really important thing with hormone therapy is there's a lot of really beneficial psychological changes which occur too, and some might be directly related to hormones and kind of their impact on mood and that kind of thing. But I think also just, again, that affirmation piece of knowing that you have hormones in your body that actually align with who you are, that can be so important.
Yeah, and that actually leads right into my next question, which is about how hormones can be very life-saving to trans folks. So gender-affirming hormones can be very life-saving. And I just was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, for sure. I think when we talk about it from a medical sense, we oftentimes just use this term gender dysphoria, right? And when we say gender dysphoria, it's really just a descriptor of any distress or impairment that is felt because of an incongruence of how you identify versus what you were assigned at birth. There's no specific definition on how much distress or impairment that is or how little. It's just any distress or impairment or a feeling that this is not right. We also know that a lot of folks who are trans have significantly higher rates of both depression and suicidality, and largely because of stigma-faced prejudice that's faced for being trans, but also living in this world of dysphoria, as we call it, living in this place of not feeling like you're able to align who you are with your gender identity. So once you're able to do that and move forward on that path, it can significantly reduce rates of both depression and suicidality, and again, just provide an overall sense of well-being that a lot of people have just not experienced in their lives.
Yeah, I mean, I asked that question just so we can talk about it, but I know that feeling very, very much, and I'm sure that you know that feeling as well. And I think it's something that trans folks just inherently know. I mean, it's that feeling of being able to be yourself, and have everything aligned in that way as much as possible. So, but I think the statistics are also super important about reducing all that kind of negative stuff that a lot of trans folks experience.
And it should also be noted, while hormone therapy definitely is life-saving for many, is certainly not required or perhaps desired by many trans folks. So we just want to make sure that is known. There certainly should not be judgment on any person or provider's part on if somebody is trans or not. But it is really important to have hormone therapy available for those who need it and desire it.
I feel myself getting emotional just talking about it, because this is like real information coming from somebody who actually has the background, right? And I think that's so important. So I'm so thankful for you sharing all this with us, and this being the information, but also the company. So I just is there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, thank you, Schuyler. I really appreciate that. And the last thing I'll say is that, we're building this organization by and for trans people, right? So we're really being intentional about composing the organization of people that represent the community that we're serving. We also know that even employing as many trans people as possible, not every trans person is going to have the same experience. So your feedback is critical. And so, yeah, we really appreciate all the feedback that's been coming from the community. And we're going to try to incorporate that as best as we can to create really the best, easiest, most convenient, affirming, supportive experience possible for anybody's gender affirmation journey.
Heck yeah, we love that. So everybody who's watching, thank you so much for hanging out. Stay tuned for our new series where we're going to have other folks who are trans come and talk about their experiences with hormones and how that went for them. And we'd love, if you're interested in being involved, we'd love for your feedback as well, like Jerrica said. So thank you so much, and hope you all have a great rest of your day.